Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm John Akers. I'm a private planning consultant, and until recently I worked for Turley. Turley did a piece of research about 2 years ago on the initial results from neighbourhood plans, and I think the broad conclusion they came to was that after a very slow start, neighbourhood plans had resulted in possibly more protective plans coming through in rural and suburban areas, but more promotive plans, if you like, in urban areas, and maybe that was something that needed to be addressed. I think it also felt that neighbourhood planning has become almost evangelistic in the DCLG. It's something they strongly promote, obviously supported very much by current government, who I think in the Cameron era was based on this sort of idea of the voluntary society, people all working together to deliver what they want as a community, and I think that's very laudable. I think what we have to bear in mind, though, that what people want as an individual community is not necessarily the same as what we need as an overall society, so I'll come back to that in a minute. I'm just going to talk about a little bit about what the house builders, developers and landowners feel about neighbourhood planning as a process, and it actually overlaps quite a lot over what Sarah's been saying. If I'd seen what Sarah had said before, I probably wouldn't have covered some of the things I have. This is actually a neighbourhood in Solihull. It's the only new settlement in the West Midlands, in actual fact, at Dickens Heath, and it's nothing to do with neighbourhood planning, but it was a nice picture, so I put it on there. So I'm going to start off by talking about who the main players are in delivering for neighbourhood planning. What do the builders say? It's not as sophisticated as Sarah's, because I haven't done an in-depth survey. I am a member of the HBF National Planning Committee, and I did go yesterday to a meeting of the Planning and Development Association, which is an organisation I belong to. And having worked for about 20 years in the private sector, I suppose I feel I'm at one with what the house builders and developers are saying. I worked for Redrow for 10 years and Catesby for 4 or 5. Then I'll go on and talk about what the house builders want, what are the tensions that are emerging in neighbourhood planning, what are the opportunities that come out of it, and how can we widen the choice of provider, a point we were just talking about a minute ago. So who delivers housing? Well, local landowners do in neighbourhood plans. They may have a commitment to the community, they may just be there for self-interest. I think it's an interesting point about neighbourhood plans. You're getting right down to the local level. People are making decisions for their own communities, but for people that they actually already know. And that can be a danger as well as an opportunity. Second group are land traders, promoters, developers. They're people who get a consent, they do all the donkey work, they take the risk, and then they sell on to somebody else. So they don't build, but they promote. They have a different set of objectives from those people who are actual house builders, who are the people who churn out the homes. I say churn out, build the homes. And some of those will promote land themselves. Redrow used to. I used to be responsible for that. Some of them will simply take housing sites off the peg. But they will not be quite so risky, if you like, as the traders. They are more of a production machine in a way that, for example, a motor company manufacturer or a food manufacturer, they're working to a business model, as Sarah said, in exactly the same way. They're not necessarily altruistic in wanting to provide homes for people who are on affordable housing. They do that because they're required to through the planning legislation. I thought this was interesting because this answers your question, lady there, about the decline of the small house builder. This is why we have such a less diverse market now, because back in the 1988 period, which of course is when house building went off a cliff, partly because of the abandonment of double mortgage tax relief, resulted in mergers, bigger builders eating up smaller ones, and also planning policy changed, because what tended to happen was that planning policies were focusing on larger sites all the time, new settlements, urban extensions. The smaller builders got left out, frankly, And I know many builders who did go to the wall in those periods, sort of 90s and the 2000s, because they just simply didn't have the sites to work with. We had a moratorium in parts of the Midlands and the North during that time when no greenfield sites were built. What that meant, of course, was that very few smaller sites came forward. People were asked to focus on brownfield first, all very laudable. What that means, of course, is that you don't have sites for those smaller builders. Ergo, they've gradually declined. And it's very difficult for a builder to come back into the market. It's a very complex business to be in. So, to summarise, since 88, the number of developers building up to 100 homes has fallen by 80%. That's huge. And in the last 25 years, SMEs have gone from building 40% of homes to just 13% in 2014. So maybe that's something we need to address, and I know government is addressing that. Moving on then to what do the builders say? What do they say to me? Well, they say, oh dear, more complexity, more delay, another layer of the planning system, because neighbourhood plans are now part of the development plan. They have equal status with local plans, which of course have a very much longer gestation and process to go through. So they also say, well, how can you have neighbourhood plans in advance of local plans when those local plans are supposed to set the context for the neighbourhood plans? It's very difficult to explain that. And the answer is, well, because quite often the neighbourhood plans are so much quicker to do, they will overtake the local plans. Now, we need to be clear about what the relationship is between a local plan and a neighbourhood plan. And I can tell you that there have been a large number of court cases where that's come up. Decisions are taken locally on neighbourhood plans, but are they democratic? It comes back to this question of who's making that decision for the community. Usually it would be the people who take most interest in that community, and they'll either be the people who don't want something to happen or the people who do want something to happen, i.e. the landowners. And finally, neighbourhood plan forums may have a direct interest in promoting or preventing development. And I think we all know that that does occur, but that's how we get the job done, because people have an interest in doing it, whether it's altruistic or whether it's personal.
Are you able to conclude?
Oh, sorry, I'll do my best. What do the builders say about the practical aspects of plans? Well, they say that the neighbourhood plans lack an evidence base. They worry about the justification for sites. And bearing in mind that builders, they have a piece of land, they want to be able to promote that piece of land. What they see is local plans having to meet those strict tests of soundness, but neighbourhood plans don't. They just meet basic conditions. So they worry about that. And of course, NIMBYism is rife. It's a perfectly natural human reaction. We don't want change. Quite often it's a bit like the fear of crime. You know, crime is a fear, but the fear of it is greater than what happened, than the actual result. So when development occurs, you normally come to terms with it. And this question of the limited contribution meeting needs, the point I'm making there is that neighbourhood plans don't make a huge contribution to housing supply, because not a lot of neighbourhood plans actually bring forward additional sites. And I think that the government said that there were figures on this. I think it was Gavin Barwell released some information about figures coming out of neighbourhood plans. I'd be quite interested to talk to you about that afterwards. So what do the builders want? They want a level playing field as long as they can build on it. They want clarity and certainty, albeit with flexibility for themselves, perfectly natural. They want fairness in judging the merits of their own sites. They want to be able to get involved, so that yes, they will want to get involved in communities. I do it myself on their behalf. It's part of the most enjoyable part of my job to go and meet communities, to get into, talk to people and see what they want. They will only do that if they've got a piece of land where they've got an interest. What are the tensions? Well, as Sarah said, builders are seen as predatory. People don't like talking to builders, frankly, and it's quite difficult to get over the threshold. But once you are talking to them, it's actually quite enjoyable. Communities are resistant to change. I mentioned the survey at the beginning. Consultation that communities do often doesn't reach the builders because they're not actually in that community. So they may find out about things later. And the examinations that are held on neighbourhood plans very rarely are they publicly held. They normally go away, they examine the material, and they come back with their report. There is no public session in all but a few of cases. Now, that does seem to me to be a bit strange that you're not having that examination out in the public. And this question of giving more weight to neighbourhood plans before they've been adopted is quite interesting, because of course local plan you don't give full weight until the plan is adopted.
But we really are going to have to conclude if that's...
Right, well there are the opportunities I mentioned, and how can we widen the choice? Well, I think Sarah mentioned some of the points. Whether neighbourhood plans should have a duty for positive planning, I think they should. Encouraging more smaller sites, I think is really important. The portfolio approach that Sarah mentioned, I think is important. That neighbourhood plans should not have to go through a full sustainability appraisal if they're introducing allocations. I don't see why that should be the case. Additional funding for neighbourhood plans, I think, is important. And as mentioned before, the clarifying the relationship between local plans and neighbourhood plans is important. Positive training, that comes through the RTPI and through locality. So that's all.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Great.
Sorry, I took a
No,
too long there.
very helpful presentation on this.
Okay.
Slightly different slant that neighbourhood planning brings onto the